On the far edge of a small town where the river braided itself into silver threads and slipped quietly into the fields, a tea house leaned into the night like an old friend listening. Its sign hand-painted and a little uneven, read, "The Still Room." In summer, vines stitched shadows along its veranda. In winter, the wind wrote music on the chimes. And on nights when the moon was full and patient, the owner, an elderly woman named Salma, set out shallow bowls on the veranda to catch the light. People laughed when they first heard about it. Moonlight in a bowl? What does she do with that? They asked. But the laughter always softened when they stepped inside. Because the still room carried a particular hush, the sort that loosens the knots behind your ribs. The floors creaked kindly. The tables held tiny vases of wildflowers no one had the heart to throw away even when they dried to paper. And a copper kettle, dented from years of service, sang a single note that felt like being remembered. Salma would lift the bowls at dawn, their surfaces thin and glassy with dew and whatever else the night agreed to give, and she would brew a tea she called the Cup of Moonlight. "It's nothing magic," she always said, eyes smiling like a secret. "Just warm water, leaves, and a little faith." No one corrected her. They simply drank. The night Lila arrived, the town was lace-quiet, stitched with the soft rumble of faraway trucks and the river's patient talk. She had come on the last bus, the kind that smelled faintly of old coins and rain. Her suitcase was small. Grief had taught her to travel light. In the still-room doorway, she paused. Outside, the moon was thin as a shy smile. Inside, a handful of people sat in lamplight, a schoolteacher smoothing a letter that had been opened and folded so often it must have memorized her hands, a carpenter with sawdust threaded into his cuffs like frost, a boy who spun a coin on the table as though he was trying to hypnotize his worries into sleep. "Come," said Salma, as if she'd been expecting Lila all along. "Sit by the window. The river tells its best stories there." Lila obeyed, because it was easier than resisting that voice. The windowpane trembled gently when the night exhaled. On the sill, a bowl of quiet light waited like a promise. "What do you recommend?" Lila asked, eyes still on the river. "For arrivals and soft goodbyes," Salma said, "the Cup of Moonlight. Some teas declare themselves, sharp as a bell, sweet as pears, brisk as noon. The moonlight tea did not. It entered the mouth the way dawn enters a room with the curtains half drawn. It tasted like warmth without scald, like rain remembered by soil, like something you once loved and had not known you were missing." Lila cupped it with both hands and felt her pulse steady, the way a sparrow calms when it realizes the window is open. She hadn't cried at the hospital. She hadn't cried on the bus. But with that first sip, something inside her loosened, and she remembered the weight of her father's hand on hers the last time they'd watched cricket together, the way he traced the rim of his tea glass with a finger while listening for the distant train. "I came to sell the house," she said to no one in particular. Or perhaps she said it to the moon. "I can't keep it alone." "Then don't keep it alone," the teacher said, so gently that Lila realized they had all been listening without intruding. "Let the house teach you who it wants to hold next." Lila looked up, startled and grateful. The boy stopped spinning his coin. The carpenter nodded as if agreeing with a truth older than his years. And Salma refilled Lila's cup from a kettle that did not seem to empty. People said the Cup of Moonlight did small things, only small things. It mended the fray at the edge of a person's day. It reminded them to sleep before the mind began its long walk through dark corridors. It nudged a word into the mouth when an apology jammed like a drawer. It returned the scent of oranges to someone who thought they had lost it forever. It could not move mountains, but it would press your palm to the rock and whisper, "Feel how patient stone can be." On Thursdays, the postman came at closing time and drank his cup by the door. He swore the tea didn't speed the mail, but he noticed he no longer cursed at tangled rubber bands, and he put the letters into boxes with a tenderness that made the paper feel respected. On Sundays, a woman who had once been a singer sipped moonlight until her throat forgot its rust and hummed the low notes of lullabies to her cat, who pretended not to care and then slept more deeply than he had in years. Quiet miracles, the carpenter said one night, turning the phrase in his hands like a well-oiled tool. Small enough to fit in a pocket. Strong enough to carry a day. Do you believe in that? Lila asked, days later, after the town had begun to learn her name and the river had started to call her by smaller versions of it. In miracles? Salma wiped a ring of tea from a table with a cloth that smelled faintly of lemon. I believe in what people do while they are waiting for miracles, she said. How they point their chairs toward the door. How they practice kindness as if it were a language and the miracle were a guest who does not yet speak it. And the moonlight? Lila pressed. Salma smiled. The moon lends courage. That is all. Courage to listen for what is already knocking. The days arranged themselves like stones across a stream. Lila stepped from one to the next. She went to the house, her father's quiet kingdom where the clock in the hallway still sighed every hour, and opened windows that had not tasted wind in months. She found little notes in the kitchen, remember the mint in the back, do not overboil the milk, if the neighbor's boy comes selling mangoes, buy two. She touched the pencil indentations and felt them bloom in her chest. She walked to the market and returned with a bundle of jasmine that perfumed the entire evening and a basket of lemons that insisted on being made into something hopeful. She repaired the step that had always caught her father's boot. She folded the shirt he had left draped over a chair, as if restoring a comma to the right place in a sentence. In the evenings, she went back to the still room and drank her cup by the window, and the river stitched her small efforts into its endless, silver song. One night, the schoolteacher brought the letter she had been smoothing for weeks and laid it on the table. It was from my sister, she said. We hadn't spoken in 5 years. I didn't know how to answer. Every sentence I wrote sounded like a door locking. What did you do? Lila asked. I realized I was waiting for a miracle, the teacher said, smiling at her own foolishness. But the tea reminded me to offer a chair. So I wrote a single line, if the train brings you here, I will be at the station with 2 cups of tea. She arrives on Friday. Joy traveled through the room like a candle being passed, one pair of hands to the next without a single flame diminished. Another evening, the boy with the coin confessed he had been afraid to take the entrance exam for a school 2 towns away. What if I fail, he asked. What if you don't, the carpenter replied a little gruff as if recurring tenderness still embarrassed him, and even if you do, we will still know your name. The boy looked at the surface of his tea which held the moon like a promise. I'll go, he said, and something proud and quiet stood up inside him. It was easy, sitting there, to believe the world was made entirely of lamplight and careful cups and the kind of laughter that never asked a story to hurry. But outside the still room, life went on with its unpredictable weather, a crop failed and the market gossips exaggerated, and someone's car refused to be anything but stubborn. There were lost buttons and lost tempers and a quarrel between cousins that crackled like summer heat. And yet, perhaps because of the tea, perhaps because of the way people looked at each other over the rims of their cups, softness persisted. Someone fixed the loose latch on the library window without leaving a note. Someone paid for an extra loaf of bread and told the baker to give it to whoever seems tired enough not to ask. Someone left magnolia blossoms on the steps of the house where a baby would arrive any day now. Lila began to suspect that the town itself had learned to speak in quiet miracles, using the simplest words it could find. On the 7th full moon after Lila's arrival, the river rose to meet the evening with unusual brightness. Salma put out the bowls. Lila followed her onto the veranda holding her shawl around her shoulders. Some nights the bowls seemed to gather ordinary dew, other nights the moon's light clung to them as if acknowledging an old arrangement. Teach me, Lila said suddenly. If I must sell my father's house, if I must begin again somewhere I don't yet know, I want to carry this with me. The setting of bowls. The listening. The courage. Salma nodded, unsurprised. She placed a bowl in Lila's hands, its ceramic cool and honest. You'll spill some at first, she said. You'll forget it outside when rain comes and think the moon has abandoned you. You'll wonder if you're foolish. But you'll keep putting the bowls out, because part of you will remember that we do not gather light, we make room for it. They stood in silence, two shadows among the bowls, while the night performed its steady work. When my husband died, Salma said after a while, I tried to outrun the dark. I drank coffee as if wakefulness were protection. I filled my days with errands that made no difference. The first bowl I set was just for the grief. I thought the moon would scold me for asking too much. It only offered itself. After that, people began to arrive. They taught me what the tea wanted to be. Lila's throat tightened, not with sorrow this time, but with the clean ache of belonging. The next morning, the bowls held a thin film that winked when the sun moved. Lila helped carry them inside. The kettle sang. Steam rose like a fine script of blessings no one needed translated. And when the first customers shuffled in with their quiet thirsts and tangled hours, Lila poured beside Salma, careful and reverent, as if each cup were a bell being hung in some invisible tower. The teacher came to announce her sister's laughter had returned to her like a melody rediscovered. The boy reported the exam had been stern but fair, and that he had fallen asleep on the return bus with a smile he pretended to dislike. The carpenter whispered he had finally written his late wife's name in the garden soil where the marigolds grew brightest and felt, just for a moment, the exact weight of her hand in his. Lila listened and learned the names of their joys and troubles. She did not fill the silences with advice. She kept an eye on the kettle and the other on the window where the river kept moving at the only speed it knew, enough. When the time came, because time keeps its appointments, to decide about the house, Lila carried the key in her pocket to the still room as if asking the room itself to advise her. She set it on the table. It shone a little, the way plain things do when they are finally understood. I thought selling would be betrayal, she said. But staying out of fear would be too. What if the house wants to keep being a home, even if I am not the one to live there? Salma poured the tea. Then choose a buyer who listens for creaks and remembers that floors have stories. Choose someone who sets shoes side by side, not in heaps, and who waters plants even when they are only green sticks. Lila laughed, a sound so unburdened she almost didn't recognize it as her own. I know exactly who, she said. And she did. The last night before the papers were signed, Lila took one of the stillroom's bowls home. She placed it on the back step, where the mint had continued living without being told to. The moon lifted itself over the river and considered the bowl without hurry. Lila sat on the step, wrapped in her father's old shawl, and let the night be enormous and not at all frightening. She thought of Hans, her father's, Salma's, the teachers, the boys, the carpenters, how they had all, in different ways, learned to hold light without gripping too hard. She thought of the house, which had asked for laughter and received some, asked for patience and received more, asked to be lived in and would be. When she finally brought the bowl inside at dawn, the surface trembled with a brightness that was mostly ordinary and just enough otherwise to change the day. She brewed herself the cup of moonlight and sat on the floor of the empty living room. Dust drifted in solemn galaxies through the slant of morning. Outside, the first vendor called out guavas in a voice that made the air taste green. Lila drank slowly, and with each sip she felt something align, the way a frame sits straight when you press the right corner, the way a balance finds itself once you stop trying to steady it with both hands. When the cup was empty, she set it down. The quiet in the room was full, like a bowl you could pick up and carry without spilling. Years later, in a different city, people would say there was a small tea place just off a square lined with jacaranda trees whose blossoms fell like letters someone forgot to mail. They would say its owner had a way of remembering the shape of the day you brought in with you and choosing a cup that steadied your hands. They would say that on certain nights bowls appeared along the windowsill, and in the morning the tea tasted faintly of courage. No one thought it was magic, not exactly. But they began, without announcing it, to practice kindness as if making room for a guest who might arrive without knocking. They left each other notes that said breathe in small letters. They repaired buttons. They waited a heartbeat longer before speaking, and in that heartbeat discovered a surprising amount of light. And when they raised their cups, there was always a moment when the liquid caught the moon, or the street lamp, or simply the sincerity of the hand that offered it, and in that glimmer they believed, quietly, stubbornly, in miracles. Not the thunderclap kind. The other kind. The kind that once fit inside a cup of moonlight, and then kept going, like a river deciding, as always, to meet the sea.